would just like to invite all of you to join in and use this little instrument so that we can record.
Yes, I have a question to both of you. I mean, it's a question I'm quite concerned with from different positions where I could work or live here. It would be, what would be the condition to go from a status of, let's call it resident outsider, or whether you're legal or illegal, to what I could call insider resident. I could rephrase it because you talk about mental condition. What would be the condition to go from a sense of alienation to a sense of eventually belonging? And it creates a tremendous imagination and creativity, as you pointed out, to come as an immigrant, illegal, let's say, from any place of the world without a passport to arrive here in a refugee camp. It takes a tremendous amount of unofficial knowledge of transnational pragmatical solidarity, which you experience also in this refugee camp, and a tremendous production of knowledge. And indeed what you said is for me essential, is like, what is the condition for this knowledge to be acknowledged and to take place in our society? I mean, you might claim a sense of belonging, but as well be denied this sense of belonging, which is what happens in different terms, because the laws are not the same in the Western world. And for instance, in France, it's illegal to help illegals. You might go to jail for that. And so I think education and the place of this education and other form of education, and you could narrow it to the discussion here on what would be the role and the position of the artist. You see all over the world the emergence of artist structure where they self-empower themselves without any support to create, to renew the intellectual life, in different ways, or the visual culture, and rephrase a lot of concepts. And I still experience or see here that there is a whole generation of artists around me who try to take this position, but it's still difficult. And the question, or as education, like in the program of Gabriel Schreiben, it created the condition to force this knowledge to take place. And so I think yeah, what would be the play? The Dutch government is considering to increase 3 times the cost of a PhD for non-Western students, for instance. So this access to knowledge would be denied to a lot of foreign students. So what would be this condition that would make it possible? Sorry, it's a bit long, but it's hard to inform.
Maybe we could all just join in while we at least collect some thoughts about it. But I mean, it is an extremely rich and very challenging set of points you make in what you say. But what it does draw attention to is the degree to which we also see the crisis of the art education system, if not the education system. I don't want to appear to be absolutely freak everybody out by saying there's a crisis going on, but in a measured English way, there is a kind of critique one can make of the limits of education. And earlier, I hope you don't mind my referring to our conversation earlier, where Maria was talking about the weekend coming together of people in Bratislava, which I found extremely moving. It's just the intensity of coming together for the weekend. The fact that increasingly we're finding that for education to begin to engage with some of these notions of belonging, how do we belong? Is belonging such a yearned after notion after all? Or do we have to learn to live beyond some of these demarcations we made about being citizen, about being the non-citizen, about being refugee and so on, that there possibly are non-identities, I call them, non-identities that we also have to seek out, But I don't want, as opposed to full-blown identities, you know, the answer to life wouldn't be the day I arrive and feel, oh, I'm so terribly, terribly English, and I've got my identity as a British person or an Indian person or an African. I mean, that would be the most boring moment in human existence, to arrive at that identity. All thought has always been how to break down identity, so we shouldn't be afraid that we live in a time when identity is, in fact, by objective circumstances and movements and migrations and factors that we don't particularly like, possibly globalization and so on, are beginning to introduce a kind of breakup here, a kind of breakup that we cannot patch together. If we just remember Walter Benjamin's metaphor of meaning as this pot that you find all the bits of, and you piece it together thinking you've got meaning, but then there are a few pieces missing. And the very incompleteness, the intrinsic incompleteness of it, is what becomes the creativity of human existence. So, once again, in saying that, I'm fully aware that there is a level on which refugees might feel, but I do want an identity, I do want a full passport, I do want to feel I belong. And those are the unsquareabilities of the situation we have to take on board. Not over-romanticize the philosophical and theoretical, by extracting a meaning and a load of meaning out of those who feel otherwise, who feel otherwise, wise to their otherness, that they are in fact desirous of a far more stable kind of condition of being. They will never find it, obviously, but who are we to say that, you know, come and join the kind of walk on water of oneself? That sort of thing just puts us into a ludicrous situation. So I think there are orders and spaces in which we have to understand the question has to be posed differently. But the long-term issue is that the educational systems themselves are part of the problem of the production of the identity of art, production of the identity of the artist, the production of the, therefore ultimately in a whole system of identities. And the point was that, such as the weekend that you referred to, there are various things going on all over the world. In Bangkok, at the PhD seminar, which engaged the whole city of Bangkok, incidentally, from the mayor downwards or upwards, whichever direction, municipal power downwards, I think. It engaged the whole city, but what I found there was that people gathered together and there was an academy constructed for a weekend, and the academy then dissolved at the end of the weekend. Certain issues were addressed, looked at, worked together, and Surawasi's particular event. Elsewhere, as students from Humboldt University in Berlin have gone on to develop, the discursive picnic has taken place all over the world. Now, discursive picnic, you might ask, who's pulling whose leg? But that precisely in unnerving these concepts, the power of the notion of the discursive, the frivolity of the notion of the picnic, putting this oxymoron together, we begin to establish an institution outside the kinds of institutions in which we normally work, but whose limits we might probe and find leave us, as it were, feeling that we cannot go beyond a certain point. So those would be the sorts of things I would come back to, but I've gone on too long, so what do you want to say something? Or maybe others just want to join in and then...
Maybe I can make, I don't know whether it's a comment or a question, but I was surprised actually, Sopawan, you talk about their state of refugee in becoming, saying in kind of negative term, because also in your thesis somehow you use this notion of becoming in very positive way, but now you talking about those refugees, you say they are in the state of becoming stuck into the present. Maybe you can elaborate further.
Because I think the present is a positive thing. It's going back to the Buddhism, this, you know, the moment of we get the clear crystal, or the moment of creativity is always in the present. It's not to make it in chronological ways of thinking, like there's a past, there's a present, there's a future. Because whenever you try to compare them between the past and the futures, there's always a binaries of oppositions. So that's why I think the moment of the present is a positive thing. That's why I say that in the positive term, that's in the becoming of the present.
But I rather interpret from your talk, you are rather negative, that they don't have a past and they don't have a future. They really
But that's
in
good. That's a good thing, actually. Really, that's what I'm trying to. That's what I'm trying to say, that sometimes we thought of this leveraging people in a negative term, because we think of their past, we think of their future, we compare them. But like I said earlier, that I think it's the moment of the present that we always forget, and it's that in that moment of the present that is a positive way of looking at this subject.
But doesn't it contradict with your approach to them, that you ask them not about the present, but you ask them to record, to tell about their memory of the Last Supper? So somehow that your approach about to them to evoke their past.
Yes, but I think a lot of the questions, a lot of the answers come up that I'm hoping that this is also that what I received from this answer is when they're talking about the past, that is also involved in trying, when they ask about the home, is kind of reconstructing in the present tense. So I think it's like it's many layers of places and time coming together in the present time. So I just I just didn't want to get that into the past, but probably the questions. But due to the answers that I was hoping for, is that the way they answer it, they formulated it, is constructing in the present times now, like they said, because of the past that they're kind of disconnected, and the futures that still becoming becoming identity. I see the sense of that. So it's like still in between space. True. Also true.
I think I'm a bit confused.
Right. Is there a lot of expectations in the Western world in order to create a different kind of to bind all the subjects together? Is there a lot of expectation in the Western world, and can we see the role as an artist to review a new expectation? So we can think that the refugees are very poor and they don't have anything, but I think they are the heroes in this kind of story. So I think we need to get inspiration from this point of view, and instead of seeing them as refugees and putting them in that role. And I think that is also the heterotopical architectural reference that we need to bind together with this theory, because then we can see that we are searching as a Western people, and as an artist you need to get this point together again. So I don't know if I'm right, but
yes, I think that's well put. I think the important thing there is that you are bringing back, as it were, the subject of inquiry into the situation and saying that what is my interest in exploring this? What sense of succor, what sense of strength or energy do I derive in examining the situation? That if I see the possibilities of a new life. And incidentally, I think you didn't quite mention in answer to Binna's question, I think what Sopawan was trying to say was that in talking about becoming, we're talking about how to live the nowness of the situation, the now. And it is the attempt to validate and affirm the now rather than the nostalgia of the then and of the forthcoming yet to be. It is a movement into the unknown, and to that extent the future is always open, or at least on a theoretical level. And that I want to connect to the very rich comment you made. But at the same time, how could we say that without entirely, as it were, doing it on the backs of the refugee? Do you see? That is simply saying that the refugee is in our midst in order to console and inspire us. That might be something we derive, and there's no harm in that. In fact, that is the powerful, ultimate horizon opened up by the presence of difference and heterogeneity, and the refugee representing this disturbance in our midst. Life was so easy until they arrived, right? And they introduce a vibration, a difference, a fibrillation that we cannot calm down. We cannot find the equilibrium we found in the past. So how could we derive this kind of reading without, however, simply using the refugees yet again as fodder for some story, some narrative that we want to construct? I think that's why one would then have to shift roles and find a way of, as it were, stripping our own identities bare and learning to listen. I'm quoting a friend of mine, Gayatri Spivak, who says, learning to listen from below the line of the NGO, I think she says somewhere, from below the line of visibility. And I know in Ireland, I listened to her give this lecture, and I asked her, Gayatri, I've always wondered what sort of posture is the body in when you're actually listening below this line of visibility or the NGO line? Are we kneeling? Are we crouching? Are we flat on our back? How exactly are we listening to the other, the refugee, when we've shut up and we're trying to listen to what the refugee is actually desiring? And my way of putting it is not in terms of posture, which I think is a fantastic way in which she somehow imagines the relationship with difference in our midst. My way of putting it is just to make sure that we are not talking louder than the refugee. In that sense, that we're not deriving such a powerful interpretation out of the situation of refugees, that we leave them high and dry, and their aspirations, their day-to-day needs for security, for education, for comfort, for succor, for friendship, for society, whatever their ideals might be, that we have ridden roughshod over that in deriving a kind of big political, theoretical message out of their presence, which is not to deny. And that's what I mean by the unsquareability of these positions in which we find ourselves.
Yes, it's this point of denial, and what you deny is very central. For instance, the new French president has just created a Ministry of Immigration and National Identity, opposing the two terms as if the immigration was not part of the national identity, and also who is it to define what this could be, or so this point of denial is really has to be addressed in different ways, because that's maybe what brings schizophrenia, is that it's very hard to express yourself in a language that is not yours, and your identity and your complexity in another, going from one language to another. Some words don't exist, some concepts don't exist, as you pointed out. So,
can I quickly ask? Sorry, I was.
Now, what browses through my mind as we're talking about refugees, you mentioned Hannah Arendt and her famous essay, We Refugees. And actually in '94, Georgia Agamben wrote an essay drawing on Hannah Arendt, who was the same title. The way I understood the trope of refugee or figure of refugee representing our times had to do somehow with a possibility of identification or empathy. But you made a proposition of terrorists being a figure of today. And I wonder what happens with that notion of empathy then? Or did I misunderstand Arendt and Agamben? I mean, there's no way I could identify with the position of terrorists.
No, and this is why I felt that there were distinctions to be drawn between the position of nihilistic annihilation, that the solution is that I'm so rubbished that we shouldn't exist. Against that, this position of creative negation, for which I refer to Neki, and in creative negation, we are able to evoke difference, to see how it is different, to even call it a negative without wanting to exterminate it or without wanting to blast it out of existence. But if we do not take the figure of the terrorists as the limit position of our time, I think then we're caught very much in a kind of 20th century model of migrations, of difference, of the production of consciousness. And I think both Hannah Arendt and Agamben represent that. I think Agamben is trying to stretch it out beyond into the 21st century. He is writing now, but the point is that the model itself, Hannah Arendt famously in that essay distinguishes between the well-heeled refugee or immigrant who is, in every way going to be assimilated. This is the person the ministry is looking for. The ministry is looking for those of us who will go for English lessons and those of us who will speak English properly. Not that government ministers themselves have a command of the language, that they're forcing immigrants to speak in a kind of proper way. It's quite interesting that in that I listened to the two ministers in Britain who were putting the biggest pressure, particularly on the Muslim community, to learn English and so on and so forth, and integrate and become as home counties as they can. And I find that really they're often speaking the oddest of English, if I were to take a strictly grammatical point of view. I mean, I fail both the ministers for elementary English. So it's really odd then, and you begin to realize it's not got to do so much with the competency of the language or the use of the language, but this language thing becomes a marker of assimilation. It becomes a way of putting pressure on people. You become like us, and the logic of similarity takes on, not the capacity to learn to live with difference. And that is where the terrorist's position begins to mirror this position. The terrorist too is not able to live with difference. The terrorist says, become like me, or I'll blast you and myself out of this world. And that refusal, or the incapacity to deal with difference, or to live difference, is the one we have to struggle with. I'm not saying that it's answered, but I think this is the kind of perspective that is mapping out at the moment. And that is why we need to understand much, much more what is going on in the figure of the terrorist, or not to see it completely at blind, especially for us in England. I mean, a piece I'm writing at the moment is called A Very English Jihadi. And by that I mean someone who in every way is totally assimilated to England, who went to public school, who lived, played cricket, who was a community care person. So it had hardly anything to do with English lessons or Dutch lessons. Ultimately, if you're looking at this, what does it have to do with? It has to do with possibly notions of living difference. And that is why the question of assimilation and similarity is a central question here, and one in which both the government and the terrorists begin to reflect each other. That, for me, is, I know it's a difficult, it's a prickly thing to put forward, and I fully understand the tremendous difficulty and delicacy with which one has to pose these problems, because governmentally we are trying to protect people, but at the same time speaking on the level of the implications of such discourse, where we promote the notion of assimilation and similarity in such a powerful way, we in fact give a mirror image of the demand for assimilation that happens from the other side, as it were.
I own the mic here. I will just take a break.
I'm just wondering, because all discussions about immigration mostly focus on the body of a refugee, and somehow the body of a refugee or illegal immigrant is identified in a larger group of immigrants, when there is so many different types of immigration, different immigrants. So my question is, how come that a legal immigrant is not interesting enough, or once again misread within the subject of immigration?
I think the legal immigrant one would have perhaps seen as an extreme version of the immigrant who's learned to speak the language properly. That's speaking metaphorically, that this person is assimilated and settled and has found an identity, says, I belong, and that is the legal immigrant, that is the journey this person makes. And we know that largely, if we think of immigrants to the United States, they are the last people who really, I don't know, one might have to test this out a bit, Sopawan, you might have to go to the United States. It seems to me that most immigrants, the mental attitude going to the United States, I want to become an American, because this is such a glamorous, powerful image of having made it. The last thing an immigrant wants to do in that sort of success environment is have memories of their last suffering. They don't want to talk about the poverty of Naples that they left behind. They did not know that the art of the Renaissance in any way mattered, because they led such a life of poverty in southern Italy in any case, that the great treasures of the Renaissance meant nothing to them. They could never get close to them. They will, when they become Americans, they will eventually, later in life, collect enough money to come to look at the treasures that they did not have memories of. So there are these different routes and circuits of immigration that we need to bear in mind. And maybe that this is why the focus falls on the refugee, because the refugee is in a far more precarious situation, far less able to say that, yes, the journey is going to end with the green card or whatever. There is still a lot of unknowns, unforeseeables, undecidables in this journey, and that immersion in the unforeseeable now is what interests us. And that's why the person made the contribution from the back saying that don't we have some expectations, a very interesting one, that maybe we also look at this as a very creative, vibrant situation, but from the point of view of our own rather tired and exhausted lives. That might be another reading of the situation that we need to bear in mind. Even if we can't give entire evidence to show this, we must bear in mind that we might be doing this. And in doing this, we are also romanticizing the situation. So all I want to say is that all sides must come under examination in this issue, that no side has an entire claim to the truth, and no side is entirely validated in the situation we find ourselves in. Every viewpoint, every protagonist in this drama that unfolds today is under review and under question, either by shifting their own roles or by being asked questions from other sides.
And is it on? Yes. And what could you, both of you, maybe say something, if you talk about these figures, these protagonists, what could be the position of the artist if you look at this sort of setup, the governments, the refugee, the legal refugee, the terrorist? Where is the artist and the artist researcher?
Actions that contributed to more than just asking only the questions, but act on it more. If you're asking about the role of the artists and also the art researchers, and this, like I said, and for art researchers, I think Sarat mentioned before that we're not asking the same questions as like sociologies or anthropologies. So I think that's also the contribution that we can contribute to the issues that we're interested in.
I think someone's affirmed a point I made to begin with, that in asking what the systems of knowledge do not ask, one is opening space for new knowledge, and in the production of that new knowledge, we see the role of the artist researcher. That, to my mind, would be one initial provisional way of thinking what this research amounts to, why is it necessary? Is it, and this is why it would be so important not to see art research as simply translating philosophy back into the world of art. It would not be right to see it simply as importing theoretical concepts from all the other disciplines, and as some people have felt, intellectualizing the artists. You see, that would be a complete mistake. In a funny way, Duchamp's famous statement that I will try to make it so that nobody will ever be able to say as stupid as an artist. Maybe today we have to reclaim that stupidity that he was so keen to dispense, because the journey out of that stupidity has possibly led us towards an over-intellectualization of an external kind, or that's the tendency in our institutions and so on. How could we revalidate the activity of art itself and see the activity itself as a probe and a tool in the production of knowledge and new knowledge? And the example I give is precisely the question that Sopawan poses of the refugees. Elsewhere she might well use, in an eclectic way, in a very messy way, the questionnaires, the facts and figures gathered by the United Nations, by the Euro bureaucracies of statistical knowledge that is gathered at Brussels. We could well use that, and there's no harm in that. That's one way of thinking the world, one way of mapping it. But there are other questions that need to be asked, and in bringing in something like that, I think you begin to question the processes of validation of what is knowledge. So for me, that is one of the key issues in claiming the disciplinary validity of art practice. It is not an add-on to the disciplines, nor, on the other hand, is a solution that art should be academicized in order to look respectable to the other disciplines. It is finding in art itself a mode of thinking in, with, and through art practice. How could that be done? I don't know. There have been many instances of it. I find the minute you try to establish it as a philosophy or a law, you have contradicted yourself in every way. That there is something in art itself that allows us to make very limited, very modest generalizations out of the event. And I think we must hold on to that modesty and not attempt to establish a whole new discipline called, we've used the phrase art research or whatever, you see. I mean, but there's language again, and it's trapped.
I have maybe, I don't know, a question. Do you experience tension or a contradiction in trying to visualize things and talking to people. I mean, putting it into language. And how, I mean, I saw the beautiful pictures you had from the Last Supper scenes in the centers, in the immigration centers, refugee camps. And is that, I was wondering, do you need the story to it? Or what is the position of the story in the image?
I think that's one of the questions I try to connect as well, you know, that the way that the audience, the relationship between the audience and the pictures that I want to question that as well, that because I said before that because we always see it in a chronological ways, that we try to connect it to the stories in the past and also probably in the future or something. So I think that in that moment that you asked me whether I needed stories to take these pictures.
Yeah, I mean, if you have an exhibition of these photographs, for example, what is the place from the story behind it?
I think
I mean,
actually, as if it's going to be a different presentations, it's going to be incorporated with the videos and also the text. So probably the images here going to take a different view to just being a photographs. And but being a photographs is also a medium that have its own meaning. Yes, it's different. If you see your images that you probably connected with its notions of its medium itself, that is connected the subject in the stories and the subject in image and relationship with you as an audience, that you see it, that you're trying to make a connection with them, that you try to think of what is their stories, you try to live with the subjects there, but at the end, like I said, it's probably going to take different approach to see it when we connect it with the text and a video.
Would somebody want to?
Maybe it's no question.
Would somebody want to ask a last question?
Yeah, well, I would like to extend my neighbor's question. How was that in your thesis? How was the relation between text and image there?
In the thesis, in the thesis, I think that's quite a different things, because at the end is combinations of many things. It's the text, the exhibitions, I mean, it's everything. It's not just the text and images, but also the curatorial practice, and it's all together. It's like trying to put different methods all together, and it's like a montage of different approaches to put together at the presentation. So it's different thing from this project I'm doing at the moment.
Maybe just to conclude and extend on this question, something I was struck by was your side remark or side comment, Sarat. When you pointed at a picture and you said it's the visual that's so crucial with bringing contemporary art. There's one question we always ask in this forum, and it's a hated question. Why is it? Why in art? Why do we discuss the notion of immigration in art? And that's a question that I get asked all the time. The only intelligent response to that I have is to pass the question further. But I have to say that the response with it's the visual really satisfy me, because that would disqualify. I'm also tired. I can't speak. that would disqualify a huge body of work, for example, that Sopawan has done prior or after, you know, bringing the image, the visual across. I wonder, could we think about this? What is it if not only visual, or maybe I am wrong, and we are in the field of visual art, and we should focus on the visual. Perhaps if I would suggest the notion of imagination, that's a key instrument we have. And I said it 1 million times, and it's probably boring, but to imagine the world differently, to think the world differently, would that be something you would identify with, or is this a completely wrong path? Why in art?
Well, surely the word imagination is tied up with the word image. And you know, we're in image as an image of thought or an image of a retinal kind, in my own quirky language. What I'm trying to do is refusing to let the retina be dominated by the tongue, as it were. That there is the domain of knowing through the retinal, and there is the domain of knowing through speech. And they don't always know the same thing. And there is a kind of rub up against them. There is, again back to my word for this evening, unsquareability between these domains. And so, in pointing to the visual, and sorry about that, it was a bit schematic, but the point was simply to remind ourselves that there is a non-discursive dimension that has to be borne in mind, and this non-discursive dimension probably is what you mean by imagination in the bigger sense, as opposed to image of thought or image of sight. And by the non-discursive, I do mean movement, body, shifting about, bumping into each other. These are all moments of possibility, and it is really just refusing to brush aside the possibilities of the visual that need me to point to it and affirm it in a way that is a little bit crude and a little bit schematic, but I think that's what I'm trying to do, to say that the answers will also have to be sought in broadening what we understand by the domain of communication between ourselves. We talk of broadband communication, but already that has narrowed down considerably the terrains of communicative possibility. For me, it's not communicative competency, which comes from Habermas, and communicative competency that present governments demand of the immigrant to speak properly before you are given a passport. It's not competency that matters, but potentiality that is the crucial thing. So communicative potentials rather than communicative competencies, which just keep us trapped in the kind of discursive domain in which we find ourselves.
I think I'm going to close. Shall we move this to the informal setting up steps?
Yeah.
And before I thank our wonderful guests and my colleagues for organizing all this, I hope to see many of you in Venice. I look forward to that. You're all welcome. And back in the Netherlands, 1st of September, we're opening an exhibition we're very proud of, because we co-produce a new work by Kutlu Bataman, and we're showing 2 installations, one here at BAC and one in the not yet disclosed location. And then throughout the whole autumn, we're going to create a number of forums, number of platforms with international thinkers about the notion of migration and fear and anxiety that we seem to be enveloped in, that stems from different threats, real or imagined. Immigration on one pole of this axis, and terrorism on the other. And maybe this is a nice moment to wrap up. And thank you very much.